Welcome back to Before the Day Ends. So last time we had this experience with Peter when Peter says to Jesus that he is not just the Son of Man. He's not just the one that they expect to come and save Israel. Peter says that Jesus is the Son of the living God when Jesus asks him a simple question, "Who do you say that I am?" Peter says, "You're the Son of the living God." And with that confession, Jesus says, "Blessed are you, Simon. In fact, I'm going to call you Peter," which means rock, because on this rock, I'll build my church. But that confession, to say Jesus is the Son of the living God, is more than just words. It should apply itself into our daily lives. And so just 5 verses after Peter has this great confession that the church uses to this day, just 5 verses later, Jesus tells his disciples that he is going to be crucified, that he's going to die, that he's going to suffer. And Peter says, by no means, no, that's not going to happen to you. And Jesus then turns to Peter, the one he called blessed, the one he called the rock, and he says, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are a stumbling block, or you're a stumbling rock to me." You see, if our words don't match our actions, if our actions don't match our words, there's a problem. And Jesus points it out here, that it's one thing to call Jesus the Son of the living God, even to believe it, but to base your life upon that confession is something else. And so now today we're getting to a story in chapter 17 where we're going to see a little bit more what that Son of the living God kind of means. And we'll see some more connections then to Jesus and Moses and Jesus and Elijah. And we'll tell you why here in a second. So join me in Matthew 17. It says 6 days later. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John, so his 3 inner disciples, Peter, James, and John, and led them up to a high mountain by themselves. Now I want to point out here that these are mountaintop experiences. Remember, we said very early that mountains have important meaning in the Bible. Mount Sinai, or which is also called Mount Horeb, Mount Carmel. The crucifixion is on a mount. The Tower of Babel is related to a mount. So that these high places where we go to, quote, meet God in the ancient Near East were very important places. So now, 6 days later, they go up on a mountain by themselves. And he, Jesus, was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly, there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 dwellings here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." Now, I'm going to stop there for one quick second. People have often asked me, "Hey, will I know my loved ones? Well, will I know my friends in heaven?" Well, if you think about this story here, I doubt that Moses and Elijah had name tags. "Hello, my name is Moses." I don't think that's going on here. Somehow, Peter knows who they are. Moses and Elijah. There weren't pictures of them hanging in Peter's house, but yet he recognizes them. So yeah, I do think we'll recognize loved ones and friends in heaven. So now we have on this Mount of Transfiguration, Jesus, Moses, Elijah, and then Jesus' 3 disciples, Peter, James, and John. Okay. While he was still speaking, that is Peter, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud a voice said, "This is my Son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome by fear. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Get up and do not be afraid." When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them, "Tell no one about the vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." So we have this mountaintop experience. Jesus and 3 disciples. A couple things I want to point out here. There are connections to what went on earlier in the Gospel of Matthew. And again, we're coming into this second half, And we're going to see this connection Matthew is making between what Jesus did earlier and what he's going to do now going forward toward the crucifixion. And one is this statement, "This is my Son, the beloved, with whom I'm well pleased." If you remember, that occurred earlier in chapter 3 at Jesus' baptism, right? A dove comes down. We have this moment where a voice from heaven says, "This is my Son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased," in Matthew 3:17. And we said back then, and it applies here, that comes from two other texts. Psalm 2, verse 7, where we have the coronation of a king. And then also Isaiah 42, the story of the suffering servant, with whom I'm well pleased part. So we have this connection between the baptism and the transfiguration, where God is saying, "This is my Son, the King, who comes into his kingship through suffering." Now, maybe it wasn't the baptism, things were kind of new and exciting, and we have that Jesus is going to be the king. Like, here's the king portion. Here's Jesus being the king, and they kind of ignored the suffering part. Well, now in the second half, we've got the king stuff, but now all of a sudden, the suffering stuff is going to play a higher role. That they have to realize that yes, he is the king, but he comes to his kingdom through suffering. Second thing, why does Jesus have next to him Moses and Elijah? Remember, Jesus said in the story of the new covenant, we call the Sermon on the Mount, that Jesus said he's come to fulfill the law and the prophets. Two things, the law and the prophets. Also remember that Jesus' day, the Hebrew Bible, was divided into three sections. The Torah, the Nevi'im, the prophets. So the Torah, the instruction, the Nevi'im, the prophets, and the third, the Ketuvim, the writings. Of those three things, two are really important. The Torah and the Nevi'im, the prophets. And so when Jesus says, "I've come to fulfill the law and the prophets," those are the two he was talking about. And so what we have here is one representative of the Torah, Moses, and a representative of the prophets, Elijah. So Moses and Elijah, the law and the prophets, which Jesus came to fulfill. And so we have both these two now brought together next to Jesus as he is the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. Other comparisons we're going to see with the transfiguration and why it's so important. Both are encountered on a mountain. So if you remember, by the way, I'm going to include the verses for this here on these upcoming slides, but Moses appears on Mount Sinai with God, and we see this in Exodus 24, and then Elijah appears on Mount Horeb, which is also Mount Sinai, with God. So we have Jesus on a mountain, Moses and Elijah on mountains as well. Both Moses and Jesus appear after 6 days on a mountain with God. Again, another connection to the story of the Exodus. Both Moses and Jesus take 3 people with him when he goes into the mountain. So Jesus takes Peter, James, and John. Moses takes Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu. So we have, again, 3 and 3. Both stories, Moses and Jesus, have God speaking from a cloud. Both stories, Moses and Jesus, have their faces illuminated. So we have here this very strong comparison between Moses, especially on Mount Sinai when he gets the 10 Commandments, the instruction, and Jesus. So we see Jesus as the new Moses. And then, of course, Elijah as well as the chief prophet. So again, this is a big moment, a Mount Sinai type moment. Another thing that goes on here, which I find really interesting, is look at what Peter says. Peter kind of says, hey, look, we see you 3 guys. Let's just build some tabernacles and we'll hold on to this moment. We'll kind of, just make these 3 shelters and we'll kind of remember this moment. In fact, the other Gospels kind of hint at the fact that they're not really sure what Peter's saying here. Mark 9:6 says, he did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Luke 9:33 says, just as they were leaving him, Peter said to Jesus, Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. And then he says, not knowing what he said. So again, this is a mountaintop experience, and Peter is probably a little bit like, what am I going to do with this? How do I handle Moses and Elijah and Jesus in this huge moment? I'm on Mount Sinai in a sense, right? I'm in a sense with Jesus. And what is going on here? What do I do? But there's something I think that is the big takeaway. Not just the connection with Moses or the connection with Sinai or the connection with Elijah or the connection with the baptism even, but what God adds. So before we had this phrase from the baptism, but here we have something added. Go back and let's take a look at what God actually says. This is my Son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. And then God adds, listen to him. I think that's the part that we keep forgetting, that Peter is missing. If you want to honor Jesus, instead of making 3 booths, how about you listen to him? This is my Son, the King, who will come through his kingdom through suffering. Are you listening to that? That suffering is part of it. That giving to others is part of it. That having trust in God in the face of fear and oppression and suffering is part of it. It's not just enough to say he is the Son of the living God. It's something else to live like it. Listen to him. Do you believe he is who he says he is? Do you believe what you see before you, Peter? Then listen to him. I think that is an incredibly important message for us today. That we sometimes get caught up in the knowing what, studying the Bible, knowing who Jesus is, and sometimes doctrine and all this other kind of stuff. And those are all very important things. But to forget the takeaway. Listen to what he taught you. Listen to what he expects from us. Listen to what he wants our lives to be like. And again, it's so easy to learn about him that we forget to listen to him. And that's an ongoing challenge that we face every single day. And it's just a reminder to us. Maybe that we can kind of put that on our dashboard or in our day planner. Listen to him. And that means listening actively. Jesus is not dead. Jesus is alive. Therefore, we should be listening to him in prayer and in study. So when we face the world, we face people who are maybe angry with us or don't share our opinions or our views, that we learn to listen to him, to be strong in the face of fear. There's a lot of fear and isolation in our world today. We need to listen to the words of Jesus and to not be afraid, to trust him, to listen to him for comfort, for hope, for strength, for courage. I hope you have a great day. We'll see you next time before the day ends.